Out of that hit Netflix series, Making a Murderer. It's generating a lot of buzz right now. Also petitions calling for the convicted killers at the center of the story to be pardoned. It raises questions about whether evidence was planted, but the prosecutor in the case is fighting back, saying the producers left out key evidence. We're going to hear from him in a moment after this report from ABC's Lindsay Davis.
The Netflix series Making a Murderer has hundreds of thousands in an uproar after watching the story of Steve Avery, who was freed after spending 18 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Not long after, Avery is arrested for the murder of Teresa Hallbeck, a young photographer whose charred remains were found on his property.
He wanted us to help him get rid of the body.
The series showcases riveting courtroom testimony, questioning the state's evidence against Avery and his then teenage nephew.
Because I didn't really do it.
The defense attorneys suggest he was framed.
You're hearing the evidence of the conspiracy.
Avery and his nephew were convicted of Hallbeck's murder and sentenced to life in prison.
Nothing in your life suggests that society would ever be safe from your behavior.
Now, outraged viewers want them freed. More than 200,000 people have signed a petition on change.org, and another 30,000 are asking for a presidential pardon for Avery and his nephew.
We wanted to present as many sides as we could, but at the same time, we also wanted to tell a compelling story.
But in a statement to ABC News, prosecutor Ken Kratz alleges important evidence was left out of the documentary. Evidence like Avery had drawn a torture chamber while in prison, that Avery called the victim's job to specifically request Hallbeck the day she died, and that he called her cell phone 3 times, twice using the star 67 feature to hide his identity. The filmmakers say they were always concerned with fairness and accuracy.
From my perspective, it's a fair representation of what we witnessed going on, and that the prosecution and the victim's family have voices in the series. We hear them talking about how they're feeling. We hear the prosecutor talking about why he thinks his case is strong.
When ABC News approached Netflix, we were told there was no further comment. For Good Morning America, Lindsay Davis, ABC News, New York.
Thanks, Lindsay. We're joined now by the former prosecutor at the center of that case, Ken Kratz. Thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. Kratz. We outlined in the piece some of the evidence that you believe was left out. Why do you think they left it out?
Well, obviously, George, this wasn't a documentary at all. This was a defense piece. It was generated by and for Stephen Avery, by his defense team. It wasn't until Netflix decided to repackage this as a documentary that both sides were invited to participate. And so if some of the evidence that was selected, I would call it handpicked or cherry-picked over an 18-month period, didn't fit with the narrative, didn't fit with the conclusion that Mr. Avery was the product of a conspiracy or some planting evidence, it's my belief that the filmmakers just wouldn't include that information. My biggest concern about this whole process was their decision then to call it a documentary.
You think Stephen Avery should have a new trial?
This docudrama, I think it's called, itself is not going to form the basis of a new trial. It doesn't matter how much attention it receives. Unless there's a legal challenge that comes forth, there shouldn't be any reason for a new trial. The
filmmakers also included information about you in the documentary. It was something we covered in years past, that you were forced out of office because of a sexting scandal. Do you think that was relevant, and is that why you didn't participate in the film?
Well, that part of the case is rather disturbing. They included some problems that I engaged in which were deplorable. There wasn't any excuse for that kind of behavior, but they happened 3 years after the conclusion of the Avery case, and so the relevance didn't make any sense to me and really a lot of people that had watched it. They don't have anything to do, however, with the Stephen Avery case. The filmmakers knew that, and to include it, I think, was unfair.
Finally, several 100,000 people have petitioned President Obama to pardon Stephen Avery. What do you say to them?
Well, as I understand, the president, since it's a state case, wouldn't have any pardon opportunity, and I doubt that any executive officer, whether it's the president or the governor, is going to weigh in on this in any substantial way. It's unfortunate, however, that the victim's family really has to go through questions and this kind of nonsense, that law enforcement's responsible for the death of their family member rather than those that were convicted of the crimes.
Mr. Kratz, thanks very much for your time this morning. He is right.
All right, George, you have a good day.
I think he is right about that right there. The president really has no grounds for stepping in here.
But a lot of people are talking about this documentary.